The official report was clear, cold, and final. Flight 815 had crashed due to pilot error. The case was closed. The airline was absolved of its multi-billion-dollar liability. The reputation of the deceased pilot was left buried in the wreckage. But for the victims' families, there was one last hope. A retired crash investigator who operated outside the system, a man they called the Vulture. They brought him a single piece of wreckage, a bolt sheared in a strange way, as if by a surgeon's scalpel. He looked at it, felt its weight, and he knew. This was not pilot error, this was a cover-up, because he recognized the metal. The press conference room was illuminated by the flashes of cameras. The airline's CEO, in his expensive suit, spoke with feigned sadness. Beside him, Director Evans of the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, stood with a grave expression. On the screen, a digital simulation of the plane's final moments played out. "The data," said Director Evans, "shows unequivocally that Captain Eva Rostova lost spatial orientation, sending the aircraft into a fatal dive. A tragic human error," the CEO added, "but there was no fault with our airline or the aircraft's manufacturer." On the other side of the city, in the dim meeting hall of a community center, the victims' families watched this scene in silence. Anger, helplessness, and grief filled the air. They knew their loved ones, those pilots. Eva Rostova was a pilot with a flawless 25-year career, a legend for her cool-headedness. They didn't believe this story. Their young lawyer, Sarah, said, "We have one more option. A man the system has forgotten. They call him the Vulture. If there's a secret in this wreckage, he's the only one who can find it." Elias the Vulture. Vance's workshop resembled a metal morgue more than a garage. Everywhere there were twisted, burnt pieces of metal from different crashes. Elias was a man in his 70s, with calloused hands and sharp eyes that always searched for the smallest detail. When the families came to him, he first refused the case. "The government has made its decision. You're wasting your time," he said in a gruff voice. But the young lawyer placed a photo of Captain Eva Rostova and the single bolt in an evidence bag on his table. Elias put on a jeweler's loupe and examined the bolt. The cut was clean. Too clean. There was no rough surface from an explosion or metal fatigue. This was the signature of a metal cut at incredible speed and temperature. The expression on Elias's face changed. "I'll take the case," he said. Elias went to an old friend at a university's material science department. In the middle of the night, they ran a spectrographic analysis on the small bolt. The results were shocking. "This is impossible," his old friend whispered. "This alloy. It doesn't officially exist. It has traces of a self-healing polymer matrix used only in classified military projects." For Elias, this was the whisper of a ghost. His mind went back 30 years, to a hangar in the arid lands of Groom Lake, also known as Area 51. Back then, he was the NTSB's liaison for the country's most secret aerospace projects. His job was to investigate the crashes of black projects, experimental aircraft whose very existence was a secret. He had investigated the crash of a prototype hypersonic spy drone, codenamed Project Archangel. He was the only civilian expert who examined the wreckage. He had discovered a fatal flaw in the drone's guidance system. But more importantly, he had seen the strange, almost indestructible alloy the drone was made of for the first time there. Back then, an ambitious and ruthless young Air Force colonel named Marcus Thorne had pressured him to sign a falsified report. The report attributed the crash to unforeseeable atmospheric events during the test. Elias had refused. He wrote the truth. That's why his career was quietly ended, and he was forced into early retirement. But he had secretly kept a small, sheared bolt from that crash as evidence, just like the bolt left over from Flight 815. Now, in his workshop, he placed the two bolts side by side. They were like twins. Elias was now certain. Flight 815 hadn't crashed. A modern version of Project Archangel had collided with it, and Thorne, now a general, would do anything to protect this secret. When Elias presented his initial findings to the NTSB, he was dismissed with contempt by Director Evans. That night, when he returned to his workshop, he found an anonymous note on his table. Vultures dig up carrion. Some carrion is better left buried. This was General Thorne's first warning. Meanwhile, the young lawyer, Sarah, was conducting her own investigation. Instead of blindly trusting Elias's metallurgical evidence, she decided to investigate the human side of the story, the pilot's past. While researching Captain Rostova's past, she discovered a shocking connection. Ava's father, Captain Jack Rostova, was also a legendary pilot who had died in a mysterious test flight crash in the 1980s. The official report, just like his daughter's, said pilot error. After weeks of effort, Sarah found Eva's mother, who had been living a reclusive life for years and hadn't spoken to her daughter. The old woman initially refused to talk. Her face was hardened by years of pain. "The system," she said, "first took my husband, then my daughter. Now they're trying to tarnish her memory. I have nothing to tell you." But Sarah didn't give up. "I'm not from the system," she said gently. "I'm just someone looking for the truth. Just like Elias Vance. He's risking his own safety to clear your daughter's name." Hearing Elias's name, the woman's guard dropped for a moment. Her husband also had old friends like Elias, who were obsessed with the truth. Sarah took the bolt in the evidence bag out of her purse. "This is what's left of your daughter's plane. Mr. Vance says this was no accident. He believes this was murder." The old woman stared at the strange, clean cut on the bolt for a long time. Then, as if making a lifelong decision, she stood up. "Wait," she said, and went inside. A few minutes later, she returned with her husband's old, locked metal chest. Jack, the woman said, believed that crash was no accident. He thought a rival officer, an ambitious man named Marcus Thorne, had sabotaged him. He gave me this chest and said, "If one day someone comes asking the right questions, give this to them." Inside the chest was Jack Rostova's old flight log. It was a victory. Elias remembered that the Archangel prototype emitted an ultra-high-frequency dying gasp signal, which was active for only a millisecond at the moment of catastrophic failure. The NTSB's equipment would never look for this signal. Elias called his old paranoid friend from his Area 51 days, Vulture, a radio astronomy expert now living as a recluse. "Vulture," he said, "I need you to do me a favor. Scan the archived satellite data from the time of the crash, but look for a whisper in the noise." He gave him the frequency. Vulture, at his observatory in the New Mexico desert, surrounded by humming servers and old radio equipment, began to search for a needle in a haystack. Hours later, just as he was about to give up, he found it. A short, artificial signal hidden in the noise, just as Elias had described. As he joyfully saved the file, the motion sensors outside his observatory went off. On the screen, he saw an unmarked helicopter with its lights off descending. He understood. He had been caught. Quickly, he encrypted the sound file he found, uploaded it to a secure dead drop server that Elias knew, and sent a single coded message. "The vultures are circling the nest." Just as he hit the send button, the door of his observatory was kicked open. When Elias received the message in his workshop, He felt his blood run cold. He had exposed his friend. And now it was his turn. Just then, the lawyer Sarah burst in. "Elias, I found something in her father's logbook," she said breathlessly. Jack Rostova knew about the weaknesses of the Archangel Project and that dying gasp frequency. He might have told his daughter Eva about it. Thorne might have targeted her for this reason. At that exact moment, the streetlights outside the workshop suddenly went out. Elias ran to the window. At both ends of the street, black unmarked vehicles with their headlights off were parked. "They're here," Elias whispered. "They got Vulture. Now it's our turn." Sarah's face went white with fear. "We have to call the police." "No," Elias said. "These are not the police, and we don't have time to call." There was a loud bang on the massive metal door of the workshop. Elias grabbed Sarah by the arm. "This workshop is not just a workshop. It's my fortress." Elias opened an electrical panel on the wall and flipped a series of old analog switches. The workshop's windows were covered with steel shutters that came down with a loud noise. The inside turned into a shelter, illuminated only by the red light of the emergency lighting. From outside, they could hear Thorne's men trying to break down the door. "All these years, I knew a day like this would come," Elias said, opening a secret compartment on the wall. Inside was an old but well-maintained radio transmitter. "Thorne is arrogant. He'll want the evidence himself. We have to bluff him." Elias turned on the radio and started broadcasting on one of the emergency frequencies. "Open call to General Marcus Thorne. I have everything. The Archangel Project, Flight 815, and the daughter Eva Rostova you killed along with her father. If you don't back off in 5 minutes, all these recordings will go to the press." It was a bluff, but it was enough to make Thorne panic. The noise outside intensified. They were no longer trying to break the door, but to blow up the wall. "It's time," Elias said. He directed Sarah to a secret hatch on the workshop's floor. "This leads to the city's old subway tunnels. We can disappear from there." They opened the hatch and went down. Before going up, Elias pushed a button on the table. When Thorne's men burst in by breaking down the door with a battering ram, they found the workshop empty. But the radio on the table was still on, and a countdown sound was heard. They tried to escape in a panic, but just then, the system Elias had triggered kicked in. A high-pressure industrial foam began to fill the entire workshop, neutralizing the men. In the darkness of the old subway tunnels, Elias and Sarah were moving forward. "What now?" Sarah asked. Elias showed her the sound recording and Jack Rostova's logbook. "Now," he said, "we take justice to them." The next day, Elias and Sarah made a move no one expected. They went directly to a public hearing of a congressional oversight committee, and there, live on air, they told everything. They played the sound recording. They read pages from the logbook. General Thorne and his conspiracy were exposed before the eyes of the whole world. In the end, General Thorne was arrested. The names of the pilots of Flight 815 were cleared, and they were declared heroes posthumously. The families finally learned the truth. The secret drone program was put under a congressional investigation. Elias was back in his workshop. The young lawyer came to visit him. "How did you know, Elias? How were you so sure from the beginning?" Elias took the 2 bolts from his table. He weighed them in his palm. "Because metal never lies," he said. "People do." He knew that while governments build secrets and corporations weave lies, there will always be vultures circling somewhere, patiently waiting to pick apart the falsehoods and reveal the truth buried underneath.